episode of Extreme Peril.
I saw him slip off the bar, and I knew that wasn't part of the act.
They gotta have a plan to get him back up.
There's no way he was going to get up on that plane.
I felt like the hospital was just picked up into the air and smacked down onto the ground again.
We have to transfer 21 babies in the middle of a major emergency.
It was like a whirlpool right there. Too much water, moving too fast, and they could not get to it.
Tractor trailer exploded on I-35.
She was screaming, "Help me, I'm on fire."
Uh-oh, something's happening up there.
I saw him slip off the bar, and I knew it wasn't part of the act.
You just kind of freeze as you watch this and you wonder, okay, now what? Now what are we going to do?
He was hanging way down below the aircraft.
There is no way they could land the plane with him under there without killing him.
June 15th, 1991 in Portland, Oregon. Daredevil wing walker Lee Oman and stunt pilot Jimmy Franklin are the stars of the annual Rose Festival Air Show.
Man of many daredevil talents.
Veteran air show announcer Sandy Sanders calls the action.
Facing speeds in excess of 180 miles an hour and forces of 6 times that of gravity. Oman will do his routine through loops, rolls, and hammerheads.
Today, Lee and Jimmy up the ante with The Hang, a breathtaking stunt they've revived from wing walking's glory days in the 1920s and 30s. Lee walks on air as he hangs from a special crossbar on the landing gear, just one of the many upgrades designed to make his plane safe for stunt work. The 50-year-old Waco UPF-7 has a reinforced airframe that can handle the added stress when Lee's moving around on the wings. And the big 450 horsepower Pratt & Whitney motor is almost twice as powerful as the biplane's original equipment. The only drawback for Lee is the added prop wash that hits him when he's doing his stunts.
The plane's going about 70 to 80 miles an hour, but as they're going through the prop wash, it could probably double that.
It's a cold, misty day, but they do the stunt twice so a photographer can take some publicity shots.
Wouldn't you think that Lee get a little tired hanging down there, and to say nothing of being cold?
I was watching as Lee tried one time to get up.
Uh-oh, something's happening up there.
And then tried another time to get up.
I saw him slip off the bar, and I knew that wasn't part of the act. Jimmy probably hit a bump. But bump's pretty hard. I mean, it just goes boom, like that, and it happens that quick.
The hard bump instantly snaps Lee to the end of the 6-foot safety cable he's attached to. The shock is so great that it rips much of his safety harness to shreds.
The invisible wires come into play.
He was trying to literally climb that cable. It was too wet, and there's no way he could have done it. He'd get up a little bit, but he'd slide back down.
And I'm thinking, they gotta have a plan to get him back up.
The first plan Jimmy and Lee come up with involves rolling the plane so that Lee can grab onto some part of the aircraft.
I saw Jimmy trying to do different maneuvers to rock him to get to one of the wings. That didn't work.
Next, Jimmy puts the plane into a dive, hoping he can use gravitational forces similar to those experienced on a roller coaster to get Lee closer. When the biplane flies straight and level, Lee feels the normal pull of gravity, or 1G. But when Jimmy suddenly puts the plane into a steep dive, similar to what happens when the coaster starts that big drop, negative G forces seem to suspend Lee in midair while the plane comes to him. But horrified spectators immediately see the problem with these maneuvers. Lee's safety cable is too long.
There's a huge engine in front of him and a huge propeller, and he's swinging around like a pendulum underneath there. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't want to watch this. This is bad.
By now, Lee has been dangling in cold, wet 80-mile-per-hour winds for 15 minutes, and he's rapidly losing strength.
I knew darn well he was getting hypothermia and everything. He just got weak. There's no way he was going to get up on that plane.
Lee's time is running out, and so is the biplane's fuel.
Jimmy carries enough fuel on board that aircraft to do the act, no extra.
Crews on the ground estimate the plane has only a few minutes worth of fuel left, but the only way Lee can live is if the plane stays airborne.
There is no way they could have landed the plane with him under there without killing him. Even on the grass, it would just torn him up. And then Jim did talk about dropping him in the water. That would have killed him.
And then somebody said, pickup truck. It was just like all the light switches came on. Let's get a pickup truck.
I have an idea that we're probably going to try a pickup truck transfer.
This attempt to transfer Lee from the plane to the bed of a pickup truck is complicated and dangerous. The Hillsborough Airport's main runway is 6,600 feet long. Jimmy's biplane has to maintain a minimum airspeed of 60 miles per hour. The pickup, loaded with 4 adult men, will need at least a quarter of the runway's length to match the biplane's speed. What nobody knows is whether they'll run out of runway before they can cut Lee's safety line and save his life. Pilot Bud Cranley is behind the wheel. 3 other air show veterans are in the back.
We only had one shot to make this work.
On your left side. I'm going to be indicating about 65 to 70 mile an hour. And it's Suburban is on the left side. Waco, did you copy? No winds right now. Run that 70
As Jimmy makes his final approach,
Forward, Jim.
a spotter in a pace car helps him position Lee directly over the pickup.
I could see Lee coming at me. I grabbed him by the arm, and then we all had him. Jimmy heard on the radio from the other vehicle that we had him. So Jimmy put power on and started to pull away.
Jimmy has no idea that Lee is still tethered to the plane, or that 3 other men are holding on to him.
They were all leaving the truck with him, and they weren't letting go. They were on their way out.
I thought, well, we're going to all be on the runway.
Bob has to cut the nylon safety harness, but the powerful plane is pulling Lee just out of his reach.
I was thinking, how long can I stay here? How long is the runway? How far out of the pickup can I get and still fall back into the pickup truck if we got him loose?
The plane drags Lee and his 3 rescuers towards the top of the cab before Bob's knife finally reaches its mark.
Bob cut that harness. That was probably one of the greatest feelings I ever felt, even if they fell on me. We accomplished something. We had our buddy.
After the harness was cut, I'm thinking, man, this is great. I made it. I'm alive.
Can you tell us real quick what happened up there?
Oh, just got a good bump. And I was there 1 second.
Uh-oh, something's happening up there.
Quarter second later, it says, I'm at the end of this cable. So it's like, what happened?
As Lee perilously swings from the end of his safety line, he quickly realizes that this situation is completely beyond his control.
Biggest worry was running out of fuel. So you're always thinking about it. Thinking about, when the engine is gonna quit. Because it is gonna quit. Quick little thought is, I got 20 minutes to live, pretty much. Even though I'm cold and freezing and, my suit's tore up, as as it worked out, it was a wonderful feeling. There's that half a second where you go, cool, man, everything worked. And then the other half a second, I'm thinking, uh-oh, Jimmy's still up there. Hopefully he's got enough fuel to one more time to come around and him to land, because that'd be a bad spot for him if I make it in the truck, and right at the end the fuel runs out for him. You go, oh, there he is, he's on downwind.
Hey, boss. You all right? You bet.
Can you take my camera?
Despite his incredibly close call, 2 weeks later, Lee is back up in the air.
Just gotta get up and do it again, or you never will.
The earthquake occurred at 4:31 in the morning, and it felt like the hospital was just picked up into the air and smacked down onto the ground again.
I called the neonatal, nobody answered. I was really panicked. Where's the babies?
All these babies were premature.
I just didn't know I could handle losing another child.
On January 17th, 1994 at 4:31 a.m., a magnitude 6.7 earthquake strikes the Los Angeles community of Northridge in the San Fernando Valley. The violent shaking lasts only 20 seconds, but it collapses freeways, topples apartment buildings, and sets off multiple fires across the city's northwest side. At Northridge Hospital, barely half a mile from the epicenter, the quake threatens the lives of 21 critically ill infants.
And I was just finishing feeding one of my babies, and we heard a huge noise that sounded like an explosion.
Donna Gill is a nurse in the hospital's neonatal intensive care unit.
It felt like the hospital was just picked up into the air and smacked down onto the ground again. And that happened over and over and over.
Previous earthquakes that I experienced are different. It's like jolting. This one is long and rolling. And is this the big one? It certainly felt that way.
Within seconds, widespread power outages shroud much of the valley in darkness. Then come the aftershocks.
There were some people who were screaming. You heard crashes all around you. Parts of the ceiling were coming down. Bottles of formula just flew out of the cupboards and smashed on the floor.
Just praying that the building doesn't crumble.
News reports quickly dubbed the trembler the Northridge Quake due to the massive damage and casualties here. The epicenter is located on a previously undiscovered fault line, buried deep below the valley floor.
It was what we call a blind thrust fault, which means it didn't hit the surface, and geologists only had a hint that it was there. They didn't really know much about it because they can't see it.
But the fault's violent awakening creates havoc across the valley. As disaster response agencies start to mobilize, nurses in the Northridge Neonatal ICU have only one concern.
We were trying to initially make sure all the babies were okay. I remember one of the respiratory therapists crying and said, I think one of the babies is not alive anymore.
Fortunately, that report wasn't true. Miraculously, all 21 infants are unharmed. Damage to the ICU and worries about the hospital structure itself mean the babies have to be moved immediately. They'll be disconnected from the IVs, pumps, and ventilators that keep them alive. Their fates are now completely in their nurses' hands. In downtown Los Angeles, Mike Saratsky, an air personality for a local radio station, is at work when the earthquake hits.
I thought for sure the building I was in was going to collapse.
But in the next instant, Mike's thoughts turn to his month-old son, Robbie, a severely premature baby who's being cared for at Northridge Hospital.
We were terrified. We didn't know what to do. Was somebody with him, or was he okay, or was he going to be alive? We didn't know.
Mike's wife, Tina, is at their home with their daughter.
Last time we had left, his incubator was in front of a window. I called the neonatal, nobody answered. So then I was really panicked because, okay, where's the babies?
Mike tries to drive to the hospital, but because sections of 2 major freeways have collapsed, he goes home instead.
Did something happen? He fall out the window? I just didn't know.
I had lost one before Rob. So I always had it in my mind that I might lose him, you know.
I just didn't know I could handle losing another child.
The hospital's phone lines are down. Violent aftershocks are creating cracks in the emergency room floor. But without power and fearing structural instability, nurses decide to move the babies to that ground floor ER.
We would wrap them in a couple of blankets, and I was taking care of 2 babies myself, so I carried one in each arm.
We had to go about 5 times up and down the stairs. And all these times there were aftershocks after aftershocks, and I said, oh, this is scary, come on, let's hurry up. Well, this part of the building might crumble, we don't know.
Through these vicious jolts, nurses move all 21 infants to the hospital's emergency room, which is quickly filling up with people injured in the earthquake.
It looked like a war zone. We had 21 babies, and we had to figure out what to do with all of them, because it's not set up for babies in the emergency room. And to keep track of them, we put their names on pieces of tape and just put it right across their forehead.
For now, all the babies are in stable condition, but it's not safe for them to stay in the ER. 8:30, 4 hours after the earthquake, Dr. Barry Halpern is the first neonatologist to arrive at the hospital.
The concern was if a baby developed a problem, we might be hard-pressed to deal with it. So we were going to have to transfer 21 babies out of the hospital in the middle of a major emergency, which was going to be a problem. I knew right away.
Worried staff members using a 2-way radio make desperate pleas for helicopters and medical transport teams that can safely move the critical care infants to other hospitals.
It wasn't a situation where you could just hand babies over and they were going to hold them in the helicopter. They needed to be in a secure environment, hooked up to monitors with trained nurses and therapists and physicians around monitoring their care.
When you have to do something that involves children possibly being hurt, you know, to me, you got to pull out all the stops and do what you can for that.
Sergeant Sean Sterling and others from the Marine Corps Air Station in El Toro will fly the babies 70 miles south to another hospital.
I'd done 52 rescues up to that point, and I'd never seen anything like this. The whole scene was chaos.
Nurses are having to hold babies in their arms using syringes and hand pumps to keep them hydrated and breathing.
We had a lot of babies who had been on high sugar solutions that were no longer on high sugar solutions. Having all their IVs suddenly be stopped, they were all at risk for having a low blood sugar.
The intravenous lines carry a mixture of dextrose, a sugar solution, and heparin, a blood thinner. Because these tiny infants cannot consume or digest milk, the IV solution provides them with the sugar they must have for their brains to develop normally.
We had to start a couple of IVs down there under really adverse conditions.
The Marines land a chopper in a parking lot near Northridge Hospital and prepare for their passengers.
And it was during that wait where one of the major aftershocks actually hit.
There's getting a tremor right now.
Aftershocks are earthquakes, and they are caused by changes in the strain in the crust that are caused by the main shock.
Seismologist Kate Hutton says the initial quake creates new stresses along the original fault line. Aftershocks happen as those new strains cause rock formations to react and adjust. In some cases, aftershocks are even more powerful than the earthquakes that precede them. Minutes later, an ambulance bearing the precious cargo pulls up to the helicopter.
Inside the ambulance, they had the babies, and they were in incubators. So each incubator weighed about 600 pounds, so we could only take 3 of them on the aircraft. And there was quite a few babies in each incubator.
Joining the medical team is a Northridge nurse who will help monitor the infants during the 70-mile flight to Saddleback Hospital in Orange County. It's a smooth journey until one of the incubators starts to lose power.
It's a little known fact on a helicopter is there is an outlet that you can use. So I was going to snake my way down where I could plug it into the aircraft's AC outlet and get the battery juice flowing back in the incubator again.
And when a couple of babies lose their pacifiers, the nurse knows exactly how to comfort them.
The nurse, stuck her fingers in the little gloves, and the babies were happy the whole time, just kind of sucking on her fingers and laying there.
45 minutes later, the Marine helicopter lands at Saddleback Hospital.
I never really thought about, what the responsibility that I'd be taking on, having those babies in the aircraft. But in hindsight, yeah, that was huge.
Once the transfer is complete, Tina and Mike finally get the news they've been desperate for about little Robbie.
I had talked to one of the nurses, and she said he was fine. And I was kind of amazed to hear that the Marines had come in to fly these babies out of there. Wow, they could take time out to come rescue these tiny little itty-bitty babies in this terrible earthquake. And I'm glad that they were able to do that.
I think it was amazing. You got this little fragile baby, and you got the U.S. Marines in to rescue him. I mean, doesn't get better than that.
As for Robbie, the athletic 15-year-old is living a healthy and happy life, thanks to the team that made sure he was safe and secure.
If you're in the middle of an earthquake, in the middle of a war, whatever happens, we have to stay with those babies. You can't just run away.
Well, I think as of that year of the earthquake, I've been practicing for about 20 years and certainly had never come up with anything remotely as challenging as this seemed it was going to be.
Phrases used over and over, you do what you have to do, but we did make sure everything stayed as safe as possible till the whole ordeal was over. I think there was just a sense of thankfulness and relief that we were all okay.
It's only us. It's only the NICU nurses are on this floor. So babies always come first.
In my personal opinion, I think it was one of the more important missions that I flew, yes. It was a very fulfilling day.
Yeah. Robbie's very healthy, very athletic, and after going through that, nothing should stop him. You beat the odds.
I would thank the Marines and the doctors and nurses the most, knowing that I'm still here today. And just thank them a lot.
He's actually turned out, I think, perfect.
It'll be a day I'll never forget. I mean, it's amazing how a fragile little baby in an earthquake brought not just our family closer, but the doctors and nurses and the U.S. Marines. It touched all of us.
We're seeing lots of cars underwater.
Water was coming from the west. Water was coming from the north. And it was converging right basically at her car. At that point, it was a raging river, which was a very scary place. She was absolutely in the worst position she could be in.
August 19th, 2003, in Las Vegas, Nevada. Unusual heavy rainfall sets off flash floods on the northwest side of the city at one notoriously flood-prone intersection, US 95 and West Gowan Road.
Still seeing some problems with flooding the northwest part of the valley. This is definitely the hot zone after the rain fell around this area.
Fast-rising waters trapped 25-year-old Angela Stitcher and two other drivers and their vehicles.
The police asked the U-Haul driver to try to help the lady get out of her car. That's when I realized that somebody was in that car, and it was getting really dangerous for her.
News cameraman John Neese wades through several inches of water to get a better view of Angela's car.
It was like a whirlpool right there, really. Water was coming from the west, water was coming from the north, and it was converging right basically at her car and the U-Haul. It was just too much water for one little place.
In a typical year, Las Vegas Valley gets 4.5 inches of rain. This location got 3+ inches of rain, which is more than 2/3 of this annual rainfall in less than 1 hour. The thunderstorm developed over the Spring Mountains about 3:30 in the afternoon, and then it slowly moved southeastward towards the city.
The hard-packed desert soil around Las Vegas can't absorb that much water. Instead, the runoff drains into the northwest side of the city, where the slow-moving storm is making Angela's situation even worse.
She finally started to pull herself out, and you could tell that she was very nervous, very scared. At that point, it did get scary because the weight transfer caused her car to turn 90 degrees and float with this moving river, which was on the street. And it moved her away from everybody.
For every foot the water rises, it basically makes the car weigh 1,500 pounds less. So 2 feet of water is all it would take to cause a normal-sized vehicle to wash down the road.
Rising water affects Angela's car in 2 ways. First, the car's water-resistant frame and the air in the tires make her car buoyant. Once it starts to float, the car reacts to the swift current that's pushing against it with 62.4 pounds of pressure per square foot. That constant pressure starts to move the car downstream at 6 to 12 miles per hour. As her car floats further and further away, Angela's chances for a ground rescue quickly evaporate.
The police just could not help. There was too much water moving too fast, and they could not get to her without a helicopter rescue.
One of the other trap drivers decides to take his chances in the water.
I'm filming him, and then I stop, and I'm about to say, the cops are here, you don't need to jump. It was the most visual thing I have ever seen in my life.
Amazingly, even though the man's head appears to hit the bridge support just before he falls into the water, he survives the fall unhurt, floats under the freeway, and escapes to dry land without injury moments later. Angela's situation is rapidly deteriorating.
It looked like she had her left foot curled inside of her window. If that foot would have slipped, she probably would have slid off the top of the car.
The crew lowers Officer Clint Malberg toward Angela's car.
When they dropped him in the water, it was not an easy ride for him to get over there. It's like he was kayaking.
But when Clint finally reaches her car, he immediately realizes something's not right.
When I got down to her, I tried to answer me, to recognize I was even there, and she didn't even do that.
Torrential rainfall in Las Vegas creates flash floods that trap dozens of motorists in their vehicles. One of the people caught in the raging water is Angela Stitcher. As the current pushes her car away from dry land, she scrambles onto the roof in a desperate attempt to survive. Now, her life depends on a police department helicopter rescue team.
When I got down to her, I tried to answer me, to recognize I was even there, and she didn't even do that.
Clint doesn't wait for her to respond. He quickly puts the harness around Angela and signals his crew to bring them up.
She absolutely looked like a rag doll. It didn't look like a rescue, it looked like a recover at that point.
Angela appears to be lifeless, but she's not dead. She's suffering the effects of a panic attack.
When I originally got stuck in traffic, it was only a couple of inches. But went from a couple of inches to a couple of feet in a matter of minutes.
Angela gets caught in the flash flood as she's on her way to pick up her children from daycare.
I was used to having panic attacks, but this was something that was just bigger than I'd ever dealt with, and I didn't know what to do. This was beyond my control, and it scared me.
Under the stress of a panic attack, your cognitive abilities, your ability to think, can be impaired almost instantly. It essentially costs you about 50 IQ points almost right away.
It was very hard for me to get out of my car. One of the worst parts of my panic attacks is that as I lose my oxygen, my muscles just kind of seize up. It's very much like a Charlie horse, but it's in your hands, your fingers, your wrists. It's really painful.
Angela's symptoms reflect the powerful changes in body chemistry that accompany her panic attacks. her heart begins to pound. Her breathing becomes much more rapid, and blood flow to her brain is reduced. As her blood chemistry becomes slightly more alkaline, it overstimulates nerves that control her muscles, which causes them to clench and make her feel as if she were paralyzed.
Some people feel like they're in a little bit of a dream state. And then it becomes sort of a circular event. It becomes a chain reaction. And before you know it, you're really sort of stuck. And it's almost like a circuit breaker. Something has to break that cycle.
Once the water got up to the top of my car, I didn't think there was any way that anybody was going to be able to come and help me. I didn't really have any sense of time or speed or anything. Everything was just kind of fuzzy.
Lying on top of her car, with floodwaters rising all around her, Angela finally reaches the limit of her ability to cope with her situation.
It was when I had accepted that, okay, this is my time to go. And it was kind of when I said goodbye to my kids that I just kind of looked up and just accepted that this is it. No sooner was I thinking that, I look up and see a helicopter flying over. But once I see the helicopter, it just goes right on by. It completely missed me.
That's because floodwaters are washing over the top of Angela's car. To her would-be rescuers, she's almost perfectly camouflaged.
After the helicopter passed by, I just laid there, just staring up into the sky, just completely oblivious to everything that was going on. I didn't even see the helicopter come back for me. I remember him getting up on top of my car. I remember he kind of lifted my shoulders and then blank. Because I was of no use. I couldn't help hang on to myself. I guess for lack of a better term, I was dead in the water. So if it weren't for him, there's no telling what could have happened.
A few minutes after Angela is airlifted to safety, her condition is perfectly normal.
I had absolutely no injuries. Not a scratch, not a bruise, not a bump.
But rescue pilot Rick Servaz knows just how close Angela comes to losing her life.
After we picked the second one up, we looked back and the woman's car that she was on was gone. So in other words, she would have been washed away in that amount of time.
This is what we trained for, though, and it went perfect.
I know somebody was definitely looking out for me that day, and I've got my guardian angel, my helicopter guy on his little cable. That's my guardian angel, and I'm so thankful.
The heat was just unbearable. You couldn't stand in that heat for very long at all without getting burned.
I had no idea that anybody had been trapped in a vehicle until I heard the screams.
She was screaming, help me, I'm on fire, I need help.
Interstate 35 is a busy 6-lane highway that runs north and south through Moore, Oklahoma, just south of Oklahoma City.
911, what is your emergency? Yes, something has happened.
On Sunday, August 17th, 2003, traffic here crashes to a standstill.
A couple big old booms. The tractor trailer exploded on I-35.
When a gasoline tanker truck runs into the center divider
Fire trucks.
and explodes into flames.
1 10 call, respond truck fire southbound lanes of I-35 southbound and south of 4th Street.
9,000 gallons of burning gasoline and diesel fuel create a towering column of toxic black smoke that can be seen for miles.
I don't have any idea what's going on.
Greg Parsons, Randy Blair, and his son Stephen are only 100 feet from the highway when the accident occurs.
As soon as I walked outside from my front porch, you could see the smoke.
That is huge. It goes all the way across.
The flames were probably, I'd say, 100 foot in the air.
He did get out of the truck.
Fireman Terry Scott of the Moore Fire Department is at the station when the call for assistance comes in.
When I looked out the bay, there's this huge column of black smoke coming up over the bank, and I said, "Oh Lord, that's not a tire fire."
At the crash site, the fire in the southbound lanes rages out of control. Greg, Stephen, and Randy watch the horrific scene from across the highway.
When I first saw the fire, I was amazed. It was all the way down the highway, and I've never seen anything like it before in my life.
It goes on forever.
Get out.
When Terry and his firefighting crew reach the location, it's much worse than they expect.
But when you pull up and you see cars totally involved, it runs through your head that these people are gone and there's nothing you're going to do.
The fire is so hot that it does things Terry's never seen before.
The gasoline tanker, the part that actually holds the fuel, is made out of aluminum. And it was just melting and running everywhere.
Tanker manufacturers use aluminum because it's only 1/3 as heavy as steel, but strong enough to contain 8,800 gallons of fuel, weighing almost 75,000 pounds. But when the fire reaches aluminum's melting point of 1,220 degrees Fahrenheit, the metal quickly reverts to its molten state. As Terry and his crew do their best to contain the fire, the concrete barriers along the median start to explode.
Concrete chunks were actually blowing out of the center barrier and coming, rolling across the interstate. Some of those were the size of softballs coming out of that barrier.
It's so hot right now. Come on.
And shifting winds are now blowing clouds of toxic smoke across the entire highway.
Can't see anything. Oh, God, it's so horrible.
Just got to where we were stumbling through the smoke. We couldn't see anything, and it became very difficult to even breathe.
There were several cars popping out of that smoke, coming northbound, and there's no way they could see. And I thought, gosh, if these people wreck, if they run into each other, we're gonna have a difficult time ever getting to them and extricating them.
I couldn't even see my dad standing right next to me. And about that time, we turned around, to start walking back up to the house to get away from all of it, and we heard a girl screaming.
Hello?
The screams are coming from somewhere deep within the wall of smoke.
We all took off running towards the car with my dad and Greg. We kept pushing forward.
Hello? Right here.
And at that point, the black smoke and the heat was just making it even harder to help. So we all three just kept telling her to keep screaming so we can hear her voice.
I can't see you. Where are you? Trailer exploded on I-35.
Interstate 35 in Moore, Oklahoma becomes a blazing inferno when a gasoline tanker truck hits the center divider, explodes, and throws 9,000 gallons of fuel in every direction. Somewhere in the thick smoke, a young woman fights for her life while local residents try to save her.
She was screaming, help me, I'm on fire, I need help.
I can't see you. Where are you? Keep coming, keep coming. Keep coming.
We didn't know if she was on fire or how bad she was hurt.
Keep coming.
Her screams were coming from very close to the fire.
I thought she was burning alive inside the car.
Stephen, Randy, and Greg are the only ones who hear her. There's so much smoke and noise that firefighters and police aren't even aware she's there.
It was really just very difficult to breathe. The smoke was very thick, and you could taste it. It's hard to describe the taste. It tasted like the smell of burning oil. I could feel it in my mouth and in my nose.
The smoke they're inhaling is laced with toxic chemical compounds that survive the combustion of gasoline and diesel fuel. In addition, tiny soot particles enter their airways, causing irritation and making breathing difficult. The most immediate danger from the smoke is its high levels of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, both of which deprive them of the oxygen they need to survive.
When my son took off Me and Greg followed him in there. We just went toward her screaming, and it was just solid black smoke. I just pictured if my daughter was in that same situation, I would hope that somebody would help her.
I can't see you! Where are you?
When she grabbed onto me, it startled me.
I'm on the phone with 911. 4th and I-35.
He screamed, "I've got her, I've got her," when he took a hold of her arm, and we turned around and ran back to where we'd come from.
These people that got me, I'm out of the car now.
Her 3 rescuers still can't tell whether she's injured, but at least they've freed her from the wall of toxic smoke.
My biggest fear was that I wasn't going to make it out alive. As I started to approach the smoke, I didn't know if I should exit off the highway or just keep driving straight, and I decided to keep following the car in front of me past the smoke. It was so thick I couldn't even see the front of my car, anything in the distance. All of a sudden I just hit something. I didn't know if it was a tree, a car in front of me. I had no idea what I hit.
Lauren's car crashes into the center divider. Seconds later, the radiant heat from the tanker fire starts to set her car on fire. She escapes the flames, but not the smoke.
I didn't know which way to turn. I was scared if I ran one direction, a car might hit me on the highway. I immediately started screaming for help.
Help me, please! Where are you? I'm over here! Help me!
All of a sudden, I can feel some guy's hand reach out and grab me. He said, "Come on this way," and pulled me out to safety.
Once we got a hold of her and made our way back across the highway, it was clear that she was okay. She was shaken up badly, but she wasn't burned.
These people that got me out of my car. Yes, we're dead. I'm out of the car now.
She's the only one in the car. She's shaken up really bad, and I'm sure she took in quite a bit of smoke.
Once they pulled me to safety, they were trying to calm me down. I was still shaking, crying, didn't know what to do, couldn't believe this had just happened to me.
Yes! No, it's just so cute.
It was amazing in that Lauren was able to exit her car and get out with her in that smoke, in the heat. I don't think she could have stayed conscious for over a couple of minutes. I really don't.
The tanker fire burns for 10 more hours and melts 200 feet of roadway. Lauren's car and its contents are completely destroyed. But even though she and her rescuers come perilously close to the flames, no one is seriously hurt.
I'm not sure what would have happened if they weren't there that day. I might not be here right now.
It makes me look at life different to know that everything could be fine 1 second and then totally change, and I'm really thankful for everything I have.
Even today, it gives me chills listening to her scream.